Hi, Jamie. This is Chris here from Duo Security.
Hey, Chris, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So now that we're we're all here, welcome, everyone. This is Jamie Burgess, and I'll be your host for this afternoon's webinar, which is Duo's Path to Zero Trust in Education. And actually, this is part one out of a four-part series that we're doing on the path to zero trust in education. And so we'll be kind of walking through a couple of different pieces. Again, I'm Jamie Burgess. I'm one of the account executives here at Duo, strictly based in education, right? So I work with a lot of the higher ed institutions that have adopted Duo and some of the ones that are looking at it. A lot of the folks on this call probably have talked to me at some point. I'm also joined by Chris Barami, who is my solutions engineer, also very much focused on education. We're going to be covering a bunch of stuff today. Key here is we're trying to keep it, and this is almost like a race here, but we're trying to keep it to 30 minutes. The whole idea behind these four webinars was let's put something together that's valuable and also quick and easy to digest. And I know everybody has, a busy schedule day in and day out. So we wanted to kind of hit these real quick and fast and give you something that you can go ahead and take back to your teams and think through on your own. But we are going to limit like questions and everything. We will have a slide at the end where you can send any questions or feedback back to us. Again, we're going to be doing 4 of these. So any feedback is very much welcomed. If there's something that you liked or didn't like, something that you wanted to see in the later editions, please let us know. So we'll talk through a bunch of stuff here. We're obviously going to talk about what is zero trust. How can we modernize your IT security strategy? We've kind of devised these 5 steps of how you can modernize your strategy. We'll talk through those. And then really what we're going to heavily cover today is step 1 and step 2 of that 5-step process. And then we can talk about how Duo can help you achieve that, and then we'll wrap up. First of all, I did want to define what zero trust is all about, right? I'm sure that everybody on this call has heard, it's almost like a buzzword at this point. What is zero trust? And some folks call it, if you're a friend of Google, right, you're talking about the Encore framework. Some people call it trust-based authentication or trusted access. Really, this is the security concept. All of these are focused around the belief that organizations should not automatically trust anything inside or outside of its perimeter like they have in the past, right? Now we're talking about, it's not safe to just assume that once somebody's in your perimeter that they can just move around freely. And this kind of opposes the old school IT methodology or the IT security methodology of, having that really strong network that all of the defense is on the outside. And then once you get in, you're kind of free to reign. And so we're going to be talking a lot about that and how you can actually modernize your security strategy. I'm going to keep this moving along, but I always like to kind of relate this back to real life. And something that's very near and dear to my heart is, as a business traveler, is the security line at the airport, right? So over the years, the security threats have changed within, the U.S. and abroad. And I feel like something that used to work no longer works, right? So every time a new threat becomes something that they need to pay attention to, the good people at TSA seem to just add another step, right? All of a sudden, you've got to take your shoes off. All of a sudden, you've got to take your liquids out and put them in a bag, pull out your laptop, all that sort of stuff. Now, the way I think about this is that it's not necessarily better security. What they're doing is they're just adding steps, right? And a lot of this is really causing a lot of issue for travelers. There's longer lines. There's more that you have to do. And So it's not only providing bad security, but it's also straining your end users, your travelers. And I think that this says a lot for kind of like what's happening in IT these days with the changing kind of ecosystems that we have. And what we at Duo are always grappling with is the idea that, maybe let's take a step back, right? Maybe let's not just add more steps to the security process, but rather take better steps and at the same time improve the usability. And so the way I think about this is like the modern approach is TSA PreCheck, right? We know that if we know something about the person, right? So now you go and set up PreCheck and you get your identity and you get fingerprinted and all that sort of stuff. If we know all of that ahead of time, then why put people through all of these, hurdles and stuff like that? So it's not just adding more security, it's providing better security and usability at the same time. And when we start to look at what's happened over the course of, the last 10 or 15 years, we notice the changes that have happened, kind of similar to the airline security industry. But, we're going from that traditional perimeter that everybody's familiar with, that thing that is near and dear to all of our hearts, which is, you had that really beefy perimeter of the network with your on-site users, right? Nobody's working from anywhere else. And if they are, you can provide VPN access or something like that. All of the endpoints are yours, the servers are yours, the applications, everything's on-prem, everything is yours, right? And that's a very easy kind of way to go about things. But as we know, it's not very scalable, especially in the modern era, right? Where more and more we're talking about moving to cloud applications, where Duo is a cloud service, so I kind of laugh at that. But moving to cloud applications, you've got this influx of devices, whether they're personal devices like laptops and desktops or mobile devices, whether they're iPhones, Androids, tablets, whatever they are. They're all accessing your internet or your network, I should say, your ecosystem. And people are expecting to do that from anywhere they want to. They want to be able to work from Starbucks right across the street. They want to be able to work when they're abroad, right? So I think something that's crazy to me is in the university network, you've got people coming in from campuses in China or Europe or all over the world. How are you supposed to figure out who is a threat and who's not a threat coming in from those locations? So we're going to be talking about all that sort of stuff, but there really is a need to kind of expand and modernize that security strategy. And how you do that easily and effectively is what we're here for, right? We wanted to take a step back and say, what are the problems and how can we offer up solutions? How can we, not even if it's our solution, right? It just give you some kind of guidance on what are the steps that you can take to sit back and kind of modernize your security strategy. And these are the 5 that we came up with. Now I'll say people are, especially in higher ed, are at different levels here, right? Different stages. Some of the folks that I talk to have rolled out multi-factor authentication. They have really good password strength. They're getting people to update passwords. So they've effectively completed stage 1, which is confirming user identities. Somebody is who they say they are. Some people haven't even gotten to that point. So we're all over kind of this path in this journey, so to speak, of modernizing our security strategy. But we're going to be really focused on steps 1 and 2 for today. Like I said, this is a 4-part webinar series. In the latter installments, we're going to be talking about steps 3, step 4, and step 5. Today, we'll talk about step 1, which we're not going to spend too much time on because I think it's pretty widely accepted. But we're really going to hone in on step 2, which is gaining access visibility. Right, and we'll talk about that in a second. So step 1, I think everybody can agree that you need to confirm your user identities, right? There have been so many universities in the news and so many incidents that have come up. I'm on the listservs. I work with EDUCAUSE, and I talk to a ton of customers and a ton of universities and colleges out there. And everybody's had the security incident where, a user has been phished, and because somebody had their credentials, they could log in and do damage. So we all kind of, I think, understand that we need to confirm user identities as step number one. I have Duke up here. They were one of our early adopters of two-factor at a large scale. And really, they were able to minimize the risk by just rolling that out. And so they're early adopters of step number one. Now, step number two, once you have identified your users, right, through a really strong authentication, we're then trying to find the user access visibility, right? So and when I say that, it can be kind of confusing, but basically what we're looking for is on every attempt to access an asset, so any application or VPN or, if somebody's accessing something, you should really have the ability to look back and say, okay, this is the date, this is the time, this is the user, this is what location they've come from, this is the device, and this is the application that they were accessing. If you don't have that visibility, which I talk to universities all the time, and they say, really all I have is my authentication logs, right? I have, and we load them into our SIM or whatever, but really all I'm seeing is what user accessed what, and did they pass primary authentication. I think that leads to a really large lack of control. And I've talked to a lot of universities who say, that makes us feel like we're blindfolded, right, to who's actually accessing things on our system and what they're bringing into our ecosystem, right, in terms of devices. So it's really important that you get visibility. And from the standpoint of compliance, right, so you've got a couple of different things that you need to have visibility for. One is just basic reporting, right? If something were to happen, how can I go back and investigate what was, what took place and who did it and what did it and all that sort of stuff. But in a lot of cases, we're dealing with compliance, whether it's HIPAA or PII or PCI or, all of those different compliance guidelines that you need to meet, NIST 800-171 that a lot of schools are dealing with right now. You need to have these pieces of information in order to actually comply with those. There's also, it's good to just kind of have the proactive ability to say, okay, here are the vulnerabilities that we're worried about, and here's what we can do to remediate them. So going even further, I always use because it was something that was somewhat recent and somewhat it affected a lot of people, which is the ransomware attack with WannaCry. And a lot of customers came to us and said, hey, we need to figure out who's vulnerable and how we can lock that down. So there's a lot of proactive stuff, but it's not just about being proactive. It's also knowing what your inventory is on your own end. In the past, this has been kind of hard, especially in higher ed. If you're a commercial organization where you have, employees and you give them the computer, you give them the iPhone, it's very easy. And, you have the resources to roll out a stack like an MDM and an EAM, something that identifies the devices. And then you have the ability to roll out something like a NAC. That's not really feasible in higher ed. I know that a lot of folks have struggled to do that, even at a small scale. And even if you do get those rolled out, then you have to have something like a SIM to actually visualize all of that data. And so it's really hard. And what we're trying to do here at Duo is actually give somebody, give IT organizations another option. Maybe they don't need all of those different solutions. Maybe there's a way to get visibility, and that's really what we're going to be showing here. The key is also there are some challenges in higher ed with that visibility, even from the standpoint of you have personal devices. People are very, strong-minded to say that they don't want an MDM agent running in their iPhone. I kind of agree with that. I understand that. In a corporate environment, you could say, okay, well, you won't get your paycheck, but not that doesn't really hold muster in higher ed. And also, campuses are very open environments, and so I think it just kind of generally goes against, the DNA there. So with that, I did want to just highlight an example. We do have a customer, Centura Health. I understand that they're not a higher ed organization, but I think that it still is a good example to talk about. Basically, they rolled out Duo's device insights, even though they've had MDMs in the past, and they've talked about how they had a knack and they thought that they had all of these different devices identified. It turned out that once they rolled Duo out, they actually had 30,000 unidentified devices that were potentially accessing personal health information, and 50% of those were actually out of compliance. So, we're talking about some serious stuff here, and I understand that that's healthcare. Some of the universities have healthcare, some of them don't, but this goes for the same thing, PCI and some of those other compliance things that the higher eds need to deal with. I'm going to go ahead and actually cut this over to Chris Barani,
Yep.
who is my solutions engineer. He's going to talk a little bit more about how Duo can help and what we've seen people do in order to kind of combat these.
Yeah. Thanks, Jamie. Are you able to see my screen okay?
I am, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, as Jamie mentioned in today's presentation, we want to focus on building block number 2 in our modern security model. Building block 2 is focused on visibility, and it's intended to provide not only insight into your users, but also help your teams identify other factors that are essential in that journey of establishing trust. Trust not only encompasses the end user, whether they're a faculty, staff, student, or contractor, what systems they're accessing, but it's also critical in helping understand what resources and what devices and in what ways these users are accessing these systems. Insight into all of this data as a whole is critical in establishing trust and determining whether or not access should be granted. And overall, establishing trust is the end goal, and it's the key to kind of enabling organizations to secure, a modern perimeter. So we'll use the next 10 minutes or so to highlight the capabilities of our product and show how visibility into users, devices, and other context-related information plays a key component in the path towards that zero trust modern security model. Because we know that implementing a zero trust framework in most cases is not something that you're going to be able to achieve overnight. Here at Duo, we strive to provide solutions that can be scaled at a tempo that match your organization's particular speed to security time horizons. Also, while ease of use is a fundamental characteristic of our product for the end user, we take that same approach for our administrative users as well. So hopefully when I go through some of these screens, you'll kind of see that ease of use component reflected. So let's take a look at some of the capabilities and highlight how this visibility provides the necessary building blocks towards achieving a zero trust security model. I'm going to first start, this is the Duo admin panel. I'll start with more or less what we consider kind of raw user data and highlight what information is collected at the time a user is accessing a resource protected with Duo. This is an example of Duo's authentication logs. These represent a real-time logging of all authentication requests, not just those users who are enrolled in Duo and who are required to use a second factor. What's important about this is that we know, for example, most higher ed institutions, they take a phased approach when looking to implement security, perhaps starting with privileged users such as administrators or key finance members. Oftentimes, however, the systems that require protection through Duo are accessed by a broad user base, including faculty, staff, students, even alumni. And so while you may have a subset of your most critical users you are initially interested in protecting, at the end of the day, all of those users that are accessing that system potentially pose a risk. So with Duo, what's nice is that once you protect a resource with our service, all login requests are logged within our reporting engine. As I mentioned earlier, we also collect key metrics around the hygiene of all your users' devices, whether they're used to access a resource from a laptop or desktop, or used to complete secondary authentication, such as using Duo Mobile on your smartphone to receive a push authentication request. All of those are equally risky from the security perspective. So as you can see from the from the authentication logs, we don't not only capture the authentication event, who is that event initiated by, but we also capture the type of device they use to access that resource. In this particular case, you can see, for example, that user used a Windows 10 device. Now, as you can see from the details listed, we also gain an understanding of the overall hygiene of that user's device. Are there other security concerns that could contribute to the overall trustworthiness of that user? And a question we often, that kind of comes along with some of this information that we're collecting about your users is, how do we do this? So first of all, we don't require the use of any agents or require the user to relinquish control of their device, using an MDM or an enterprise management solution. We know that in higher ed, for example, is very heavily driven by BYOD. And for this reason, we know that organizations oftentimes believe that gaining user and device level insight is just outright unattainable. Now, because we've architected our solution to sit in line with that user's primary authentication workflow, we're actually able to leverage this and capture a wealth of other important details in that workflow. So Duo's agentless approach, we're actually leveraging open API calls to gather information about the types of devices, even where that user is attempting to access a campus managed resource. These are all going to be using APIs that are in most cases used for a user experience perspective. We're actually able to use these as a security tool. So how can this information be used in real world, and how do we see organizations using this information within their daily IT operations? Well, this information is very helpful in a number of ways. I'm sure you're all familiar with requirements, or starting to become more familiar with requirements around GLBA, or controlled unclassified information, as well as auditing and testing, all of the kind of work that needs to be shouldered to ensure your organization is compliant. If you look at GLBA, for example, it outlines the things that organizations need to be able to prove with regards to safeguarding, for example, student information. The requirement outlines, for example, that organizations must be able to take steps to detect, prevent, and respond to attacks, intrusions, or other system failures. And Duo's solution provides your teams with the framework to quickly detect suspicious activity for any authentication attempt, and we also provide the mechanism to be able to help prevent and respond to attacks. So as you can see from this logging capabilities, we can provide a breadth of information, such as where did the access to that information originate from? Was the attacker attempting to leverage, a vulnerability, or an out-of-date device? At the end of the day, we know that attackers are kind of indiscriminate. They'll look to leverage more than just the user's credential to gain unauthorized access. So it's equally important to consider the hygiene of the user's device as part of your security model. So let's transition to our device insight panel, and I'll walk you through a couple of examples. So as you can see from the device insight panel, we focus on summarizing information collected about your users in a very easy to digest format. We've created a handful of executive highlights that give your team an overview of the overall hygiene of your users' devices across your organization, but we can also help identify specific areas that may necessitate more attention and could potentially pose previously unidentified security risks. So let's drill down into that information a little bit further, and I'll provide some examples of how organizations have helped use this information. We'll start with laptops and desktops. So we often hear that organizations struggle to be able to close the gap in terms of identifying who is potentially using an at-risk device. For example, we recently worked with a large teaching hospital back east, and they were extremely concerned because they had a population of out-of-date Windows machines that were susceptible to last summer's WannaCry outbreak. And so this was a vulnerability that affected, users of out-of-date Windows devices. Now, with that institution, because these machines were not part of their domain joined population, they couldn't really easily determine who owned or who were in control of these devices. They just knew that they were attaching to resources that they were tasked with securing. Additionally, they also believed that that they lacked the capabilities to be able to quickly enforce whether or not access for these non-compliant machines should be granted. So using our device insights, we were able to help them quickly identify who these devices belong to, what devices were at risk. Furthermore, once we helped them identify these users and devices, we were able to leverage Duo's policy and control to then be able to quickly establish a resolution path. Now, we're not going to go into our policy and control engine today. We'll cover that in our next presentation. But to summarize, we were able to help them identify and help ensure these devices continue to remain compliant moving forward. And that's something that we'll get into in subsequent presentations. Now, similarly, if you look at users with mobile devices, you'll see that we have similar capabilities around identifying users with at-risk mobile devices. If you take, for example, a vulnerability like stage fright, which affected users of older versions of Android, Duo's device insight capabilities can help you not only identify devices susceptible to this potential security risk, but we can also identify other security risks that are traditionally hard for organizations to identify. This, for example, may include users with lack of proper disk encryption or the lack of a screen lock. This is particularly important using the earlier example with regards to GLBA, because the mandate around securing student and other information really kind of focuses on steps that are taken to ensure that unauthorized access is not granted. Using the example that Jamie mentioned earlier, Centura Health, for example, was able to identify and reduce the risk level of devices that potentially had access to personal health information, and they were able to do so without using, a solution like a costly MDM solution. So lastly, Duo provides the ability to either directly generate reports from this Duo admin panel. Any of the information that we collect about your users is essentially your information to do with it as you see fit. So we offer reporting capabilities that can be exported. If you're using a syslog server or a SIM like Splunk or QRadar, you can actually take this information into those solutions, and you can use that to better, more centrally manage all of your data. We've had a lot of customers that will take this information, for example, into Splunk. They'll use that to build a custom dashboard. Really kind of the sky's the limit is available in terms of how you'd like to use that. So as you can see from the reporting and device insight capabilities, we offer a number of ways for, a number of easy to use, easy to digest solutions that can be used to kind of better understand the potential risk of your users and the devices they possess across your organization. I know we're at time here, but I'll turn it over to Jamie, who will summarize today's presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Always a struggle to try and hit that 30-minute mark. I think we're right on time. I'm going to just switch over. Give me 1 second here. And so we can talk through just kind of what we've covered, right? And so to kind of summarize here, so we talked about zero trust, right? Whatever you call it, it's basically the idea that you're not supposed to automatically trust anything within your perimeter until you've actually verified the trust of that individual. Again, we talked about traditional versus modern perimeter and how that's all changing. We talked about the first 2 steps in the 5-step process that we're trying to kind of put together here and help you out with. Step 1, obviously, having a strong authentication process so you know who that user is. Step 2 is just kind of getting all that visibility, all the stuff that we just talked about, trying to understand who's accessing what, using what, from what location, all that, kind of good recon stuff. I know from my perspective, we talked about how hard it is to do this in kind of the, in the segment that we talked about, like an MDM and a NAC and all that sort of stuff. We can really do this. We can provide the visibility that you need in a very easy and effective manner without And that's the key, is without straining users and without straining your IT resources. So please, if any of this is of, kind of ringing true with you, and you're interested in learning more, please reach out. Let us know how we can help you. And then, kind of I guess a teaser for the next installments of this webinar is, once you have all this visibility, what are we going to do with it, right? And so a lot of the next webinars we're going to put on is talking a lot about, like, how can we take this information, understand the risks, understand what you're okay with and what you're not okay with, and enforce, proper security policies. So I'll leave you with all that. First off, thank you. Thank you for taking time with us today. I know we went a couple minutes over, but I think we got it down to 30 minutes. I hope it was very powerful. I hope it was valuable for you. I hope it was good time used. Please let us know if you have any feedback, both positive and negative. And if you have any questions, shoot us a note, edu@duo.com. It'll go directly into our education mailbox, and we can answer those appropriately. So with that, I will go ahead and wrap up here. Thank you all again, and have a great Wednesday afternoon.